The shot by McCormick is down in front. Put it on, he scored! Harvard wins the national championship.
Thank you and welcome everyone to our evening roundtable discussion about the Harvard men's hockey national championship season from the 1988-89 season. It was certainly a historic one, and I am grateful and honored to have not only three of my teammates, but three of my closest friends joining me tonight to reminisce and take a stroll down memory lane of a magical year that I think in some way, shape, or form shaped all of our lives. And so tonight's panel includes Ed Crayer, Lane McDonald, Ted Donato, and myself, yours truly, Chuck Hughes, who are all four members of that team. And thank you everyone for joining in the conversation tonight. And what I'd love to do is I'd love to start, Lane, with you, and tell us a little bit about the start of that year. You're the captain of the team. You're a former member of the Olympic team, returning from an incredible experience to lead a team that had high expectations. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts coming into the year.
So Chuck, listen, I think you framed it quite well. I mean, we were fortunate, and Al Bourbeau and I were both in the same boat of having had that Olympic experience and then coming back to Harvard. And we were so excited to be back. And we knew that we had a special team when we came back. We had had some really great years at Harvard previously. In '86, we lost in the semifinals, or in the finals. '87, we lost in the semifinals. And then Teddy and his group had come in as a great recruiting class. And then you and Al and the rest of your classmates came in with Sneddy and everybody. And so we knew we were loaded from the standpoint of older experience and talent and younger experience and talent. And so coming to that year, I think we all had very high expectations for what we could achieve. And we had been close. And really, I think as we kind of all sat around at the beginning of the year, and I remember kind of at the rink, we all kind of got together for that orientation initial meeting. And I think we all agreed that our objective was to try to win a national championship, right? You never know whether it's all going to come together, whether all the pieces are going to be in place, whether injuries are going to be problematic, whether a little bit of bad luck along the way can really derail things. But we had the talent, we had the experience, and we had been so close that this was the last kind of goal, last objective for this program. And so we went into that year, certainly as one of the team leaders, of which there were many, was we want to win a national championship, right? That's our objective, is to win a national championship. And so it was really focused around that as a priority, and also just having a great experience as well with a great group of guys.
Eddie, you had played on a team that had gone deep in the NCAA in a previous year. What was it like for you and the guys like Lane to go through, advance far in the NCAA tournament, come up short, and how it sort of changed your focus on, that 88-89 season?
Well, I can tell you, Chuck, it was so important, I think, for the four of us who were on the 86 team that lost in the finals to Michigan State. That would be Lane, Al, Josh, and myself. That's five. Nick Caron was on that team too. To be so close to winning the national championship and then having it slip away in the last period, what happened back in '86, that was a devastating blow for us. I mean, at least it was for me as a freshman. I remember it really well. We never lost that feeling, right? We came so close, but fell a little bit short. So fast forward to the 88-89 season, we knew that was a realistic goal, given the amount of talent, given the blend of youth, and skill, speed, and size and grit that we had. I mean, even Coach Cleary knew we had a pretty special collection of players that year. But right from the get-go, that was our goal, to win the title. It's a lofty goal, to be sure, but that's what it was. And sure enough, 6 months later, when we were out in 2004, just having had that experience of having been there before and coming so close and falling short, that really provided the extra motivation to go all the way this time. And that little bit of experience is very helpful, especially when the game comes down to a matter of inches or a lucky goal here or a hit the post there, right? Good veteran teams that work hard and play with experience sort of create their own luck, right?
Right. Well, and you you laid it out perfectly. And you think about veteran experience and also young new talent, right? Our team was split, like my class, right? To be so young and strong on the defensive side with Elaine and myself sharing time in the net, and then you have Brian McCormick, and you have Kevin Snedden playing huge roles for us as freshmen, and then Teddy, your class. I mean, your class is, in my mind, one of the deepest college hockey classes of forwards in particular I've ever been amassed and around. And I'm curious, you're coming back for your second season, and thinking about our preseason, like what was on your mind as one of those, 1 year at Harvard, but you guys got bounced by Michigan State at home in the NCAAs that year. Like, what was your mindset coming into the year?
Well, I think obviously, losing in the freshman year to Michigan State, that was the bad news. The good news is that Lane and Alan Bourbeau decided not to just come back and try to play in the NCAA tournament, but come back for the full year the following year, and that was huge. I think for me, I think that when it came time to decide where to go to school, and I had played with Peter Savagula, was actually my line mate on the U.S. 16 and 17-year-old team, and I knew who Mike Vucinic was. I knew who John Weisbrod was. For me, I felt like going to Harvard, I was going to have a chance to not only go to one of the best schools in the world, but we had a chance to win. I mean, you look at the 3 years, before my freshman year, they made it to the Final Four. I think 3 out of 4 years. So this was a program that was having a lot of success. And for me, I'm sure I was ignorant enough to just sit there and say, hey, why can't we win this? So when guys like Eddie and Lane and Albie came back, I didn't think it was anything special to think that, hey, we should be able to win this. And I probably didn't appreciate how hard it would be to win it, but I certainly didn't think that we were out of line, with our focus on trying to win the national championship.
You both said something that really connects with me, and it's a little bit tied to this year, but it's also a life lesson for those who are watching this video. And that is, Eddie, you talked about, losing in the finals as a devastating moment that was served as a motivator. For me personally, I got cut from the freshman hockey team. For those of you guys know my story, and then I ended up transferring to Catholic Memorial and playing with Teddy for 3 years. And probably that's how I got to Harvard, is following in Teddy's coattails. But, Ted, if you don't mind me, bringing it up, because I'm really curious. I never asked, but I do remember Steve Cedarchuk, my sophomore year, talking about how we cut the MVP of the national championship team from the World Juniors. Did that have an impact on you that year? Did that motivate you at all?
I think it did. I had played the year before on the World Juniors, so I had expected to be on that, on the team again. I think was in the top few scorers, and whatever for whatever reason, wasn't able to be on the team. I think early on, they were kind of on the watch list, so I wanted to get off to a good start. There was no question the game versus BC probably meant a little more to me, than others at the time. When I hadn't been selected to the team, but I think as athletes, or just as competitive people, sometimes you kind of create chips on your shoulder to try to motivate yourself. So for me, yeah, I was I wanted to play on that World Junior team, and in some ways, it might have been one of the best things that never happened to me. Because I was able to really dial in and get focused on what we could do at Harvard, and I think for me the makeup of that team was really unique. You had so many guys with so many great experiences. That it was a fun group to come every day to practice, right? I mean, you had guys, yapping at each other. You had Albie, sitting on the ground in the corner after he scored a goal, and all sorts of fun stuff. But it was a team that kind of had the best of both worlds. We were focused, but I think we had a lot of fun, and that's something for me as a coach. You try to strive for is, hey, everybody wants to have success, but can you enjoy it along the way?
There's no doubt it was a fun season, and it really started at the top with you, Lane, as the captain. And maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about how we approach the preseason. From our touch football games to our running, and Eddie, maybe talk a little bit about Monday practice and give a sense of what our regiment was as a team that year.
Well, if I told anyone about our preseason training regimen or our Monday practices, they would think we were a bunch of clowns and not the actual national champions, right? We had aerobics in the ITT. In true 1980s fashion, we had an instructor come in with a big tune box in her Reeboks, right? And would do like 45-minute aerobics classes to get.
But none of us wore spandex, Eddie.
No, thankfully there was no. There might have been some short shorts, Larry Bird type short shorts, but no spandex. And that was our preseason training. When you compare to what the guys do now, it's a little bit different. And the Monday practices, I think this is important because Coach Cleary, as great as a coach as he was, and as wonderful of a guy as he is, and what a great player he was back in the day, he always said, if we're not having fun out here, what the heck are we doing, right? And so our Monday practices were like a circus. Al Bourbeau would play goal. You were playing out, Chucky. It was like if someone spied on our team and came to a Monday practice, they would have thought we were, a bunch of stooges, right? But that was part of it. There was a time to work hard. There was a time to have fun too, and we did both.
And I would weave in, Ed. So the one takeaway I have from those aerobics classes is that hockey players have no rhythm whatsoever. So it was a horror show of people not being able to follow the music to the steps that the aerobics instructor was trying to tell us at right foot, left foot, and it was just a disaster. But we all had fun, right? It was in team building. And I'd say on the Mondays, it was always just finding that balance of having fun while competing. I also thought some of our pregame skates that would devolve to serious drop puck, like people getting competitive, because we had such a competitive group of guys, even while having fun, everyone wanted to win. And so you'd push, and no one more so than Coach Cleary. When he played drop puck on Monday, no one wanted to win more than Coach Cleary, and the stick handling and the head fakes, and he'd have more fun and be more competitive than the rest of us. I still shudder though at Teddy D coming down the wing when Al Bourbeau's in net, ripping a head-high slap shot. That was really funny. And thinking, gosh, Al's my centerman. Like, I don't want him going down to the practice while he's playing net.
Yeah. Or better yet, when Jack Corain, legendary 1960s Olympic captain, would put a $10 bill by the Zamboni room for warm-ups, and guys like Ted and Mike Vukanich would try to hit me in the head to maybe get a little cash reward from Jack at the end of practice. So
Chuck, don't sell yourself too high. It was a $5 bill.
That's about all that I'm worth, but I have the eggs on my head to show for it. In looking at the season, guys, I'm looking at like how we started. I mean, we started 15-0, and I would love any one of you guys jump in there and talk about, like, I'm looking at these scores, like 9 goals against Princeton, 10 goals against Brown, 9 against Cornell, was always a good team, 10-0 against Dartmouth. That was the game CJ scored, 3 goals in less than a minute, which I think might be the fastest 3 goals still in NCAA history. You guys are all forwards. Talk to the audience about what the offense was like and how you guys played.
Can I start on that one?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I two quick thoughts. As for the CJ Young hat trick against Dartmouth, he, because of that incredible accomplishment, he found his way into Sports Illustrated. Do you guys remember the faces in the crowd? That looks right. So CJ Young was in Sports Illustrated, and a good friend of ours, I'm looking at Lane now, a guy by the name of Ned Desmond played defense on that Dartmouth team. And whenever we talk about that CJ Young hat trick, he always says, "I should have been in Sports Illustrated. I was on the ice for all 3 goals." And then the other thing is, a good buddy of mine here in Winchester, who I spent a lot of time with, he asked me a lot about that about that team. He was a freshman at Princeton the year we won it. And one of the things that he remembers, and I confirmed this for him, was when teams came up against us for the first time, like you talk about the first 15 games, right? The first time a team played us, they weren't used to that kind of speed. We had a lot of team speed, and we would roll 4 lines in almost every single game, if not the first cycle of lines, maybe the second cycle. So the first 6-7 minutes of the game, they'd get a penalty. They're not used to that speed, so they would hook or hold or trip us or whatever. And when that happened, out comes our power play with 5 Olympians, 5 forwards, and 45 seconds later, the puck was in the net. Like almost every single game, we had a 1-0 lead after one cycle of the lines, simply because of our speed. Right? I think that was pretty cool.
Lane, talk to me a little bit about how you viewed the game, at that time, and sort of like Ed said, the speed, and how do you see sort of the game then compared to today, and could our players skate at the level that the game's at today? What do you think about that?
Oh gosh, Chuck, it's such a hard question, right? And everyone with kind of everyone who's old thinks they were pretty good, and perhaps better than we were in some ways. But I would give credit to Coach Cleary and Ron Tomasoni both for being visionaries in many respects about it being a speed game. And now the NHL and even college hockey, right? It's all a speed game. They were there kind of back in the 1980s. It was speed. We played on a bigger ice surface, right, at Harvard, slightly bigger than most rinks. And our team was built around speed. Everyone could skate, and a lot of guys could just flat out fly. And so we would just create so many opportunities because of that team speed. And it wasn't just offensively creating goals. It was forechecking wise, taking away time and space. But there was so much team speed. But Coach Cleary had that mindset of, we're going to recruit speed. Ron had the same mindset, Tomasoni, and then we're going to let them play, right? And it wasn't going to be the structured game. It was going to be, we're going, and let them worry about us, not us worry about them, and just take it to them. Aggressive forecheck, right? Make plays and create opportunities. And so when we roll 4 lines, there wasn't truly anyone in the country who could line up 4 lines to 4 lines with our group of forwards or our defensemen as well. So it was just one of playing to our strength and just getting after it as much as we can and being as aggressive as we could be.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I'm going to ask Ted the same question. I know it's hard to project era to era, but when you look at 5 Olympians, and I don't know if a half a dozen guys had time in the NHL, was it a harder game for guys of your size, Lane, or Teddy's size to make it? And Ted, you had a 10+ year career in the NHL. But as a coach of a Division I team, and looking at the way the game has evolved, do you feel like the speed that's emphasized today is comparable to sort of what Coach Cleary was doing back then?
I agree. I agree with everything that's been said. I think Eddie kind of hit on, Coach kind of had a model like, hey, we're going to play fast, we're going to get after you, and if you're going to have to hook and hold us to slow us down, and then we're going to get on the power play and make you pay and kind of take you out of the game. I also think there was a lot of kind of internal competition with the team in a good way, where if the line of fire got on the ice with CJ and Lane and Alan Bourbeau and scored a goal, that meant Peter Savagula, Eddie Crayer, and John Weisbrod wanted in on the action, and then I can tell you, we would be sitting on the bench, with myself and Mike Vukanich and Murph, and we said, hey, we got to get in on this, and let's us be the line tonight, and and I think there was a good internal competition for everybody to kind of want to get going, and I think quite honestly, I think that's that helped. It wasn't like we had the best line in the country, we had the best player. Lane was the Hobey Baker winner, but what made it kind of interesting for other teams is that we had a second line and sometimes a third line that could give you a handful. So and as far as comparing it to today, back then, while we played fast, when you got to the NHL, it was all about holding people up and interference and and hooking and holding. So I actually think that a lot of the guys from that team would be more successful now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you wouldn't be able to hold them or hook them. You know, I've said a lot of times, you know, that, you know, people ask me, geez, you know, how would Lane have done if he, you know, didn't, you know, get injured? And I say, well, you know, it's not whether, you know, Lane would have played in the National Hockey League. He would have been a superstar. I have no doubt. I've played with, you know, I've been very, very fortunate to play with some of the best players in the world. And I think Lane would have been a superstar. And if you put him in today's game with the ability to, you know, the way he could skate, you know, he would be, you know, a handful to try to stop it in full motion. So, yeah, things change. And, you know, certainly guys are faster and, you know, more conditioned than we were. But, you know, I'd like to think that, you know, all things being equal, I think a lot of guys on that team, you know, would have had, you know, real successful and long careers.
Hey, guys, I'm going to add one comment to that, if I may. I agree with the comment that some of the best hockey we played that year was literally on our own rink at Bright Arena in practices. Some of those scrimmages, blue line against the black line, or, you know, the firing line, you name it. So just for fun, I texted Ron Tomasoni the other day, and I said, who was really the best line on that team? He said the blue line, hands down, was the best. we didn't need the accolades. Wise Broad, they agree.
You know, and it's funny though, Edzo, like, you know, we talk about the vaunted offense and the Olympians and, you know, the guys that, you know, were the high profile players, you know, and I think about one of the games, overtime, last shift of the game, we're about to tie UNH in a game that Alain Roy played unbelievable. And I'd love you to talk about, you know, what coach or what Peter Savaglia called in the play, because you, Wise, and Pete were on the ice. It was a 3-3 game with 5 seconds left. Why don't you take it from there and talk about that play and just how coach would put anybody out in any situation?
Just to be clear, you're talking about when Wise Broad scored to win the game, yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I got to be honest with you. I don't remember that play all that well, but I do remember being sort of surprised that we weren't winning handily. I mean, we weren't used to being tied 3-3 against a UNH team. With all due respect, they were not the top of Hockey East that year. Right. I think maybe we figured we were going to roll those guys, and it didn't happen. As for what happened on the winning goal, I got to be honest, I don't remember. I remember it. I'm sure I got out of the way, and Wise and Savags performed their match.
Do either of you guys, Teddy or Lane, remember that play? I mean, I didn't play that game, but
yeah, Peter pushed it through the center's legs. Wise went forward. He tapped it in on the back door for the win.
I mean, it was just great. The fact they just look, you were out there, Edzo, and they just looked at each other.
Yeah. I think they put they lined up behind, so everybody was focused on him, you know, taking the big shot.
You got your
+1.
Later on, you were not the decoy in the most important overtime goal of all. But I use that as just an example because I'm looking at overtime wins, right? At home early in the season, Ted, you were talking about motivation, and I think you scored slap shot from the power play in overtime from the point to beat BC 4-3. I look at Peter Savaglia off the face-off with less than 5 seconds left in overtime. So look at John Weisbrod, which should be the center should just drop to the knees and block Savags, and he puts it through him, and he makes a pass to the back door for a goal. Like, I just think about that plus the national championship game, and there's some incredible, like, just individual plays that guys who are special talents had.
And Chuck, if I'm not mistaken, was the BC one, was that the I'm a PTPer, Teddy?
Yes, it was.
He doesn't want to, Lane, you got to tell the audience about that, because that is just a classic Tedism.
Yeah, and I think we were on the power play, Teddy, were we not, when you scored?
We were. Yeah.
So we're in the power play, we're in overtime, it's BC, big game, right? And it's back, I mean, it was so much fun for all of us, right? And we have such great
sold out rink.
Fan support, alumni support. I mean, standing room only. You couldn't get into the building, and the place was just rocking. And it was a great game. BC had a good team, and I think Greg Brown and a bunch of guys, so they were really good. But we're in overtime, and it was just so Teddy scores, and I don't even remember the goal as much as I remember the celebration, which is, and we're all right, kind of jumping around, and Teddy's in the middle of it. I'm a PTPer, baby. I'm a primetime player, baby. Mattel, who was kind of the famous basketball announcer, was always PTP, primetime player. And so it was one of those where it was awesome because, it was like, okay, Teddy, as you had a history of doing, going back to high school, right, of just stepping up in those big moments. And it was one of those, and it was just such a euphoric celebration in a big game that just helped us, I think, as a team, continue to believe, right? In those tough moments, are we going to find a way to make it happen? And maybe it was Savags and Wise in 1 minute. Maybe it was Teddy, ultimately Edzo, right? Different guys would step up in those moments. But Teddy's celebration was awesome.
Well, I think Albie was the first one to get to me. So that kind of led to, nonsense to begin with, right? Albie come over, jump on you. And, hey, that's the great part about it is I feel like we had so much fun. I mean, guys enjoyed it. I don't think, I'll ever see a team who had two guys on the point on the power play that had less fear for that puck to come out of the zone. I mean, we would hang in there at all costs, with Albie be making glove saves and knocking pucks down. Like, we were all in to try to keep the puck in. So really cool.
And the best part, like that goal was a slap shot from the blue line, like that you beat Scott Gordon, and it was pretty awesome to kind of just I think, and tape will bear it out. I think it went Albie to you, and you just left shot in the middle of the blue line, just turned and just ripped one through traffic and, get the OT winner.
It was those moments that kind of gave us, I guess more confidence, whether it was the Beanpot or coming down the stretch that, I felt that year no one could come into our place and beat us, and that's, I think a lot of that confidence came from Coach Clary, really, just the way he treated us and the fact that he would put out anybody in any situation. How couldn't you have, more confidence with, when your coach is like that?
And it's funny, Ted, you say nobody could beat us at home. Well, that year we did go undefeated at home, but, we didn't have a perfect record. I mean, I would argue we had one of the greatest records and greatest seasons of all time of anybody in college hockey. But we suffered our first loss at Yale, which has been a nemesis for a long time. And I think it's good for everybody to, to know that we had our setbacks and we lost at, Yale to a sold out, Ingles crowd 3-1. And, Elaine, as the leader of the team, I'm curious to get your take on, your thought about how the game unfolded and how we responded as a team afterwards.
Gosh, I mean, there have been so many good times and things have been, almost not too easy, but really good for our team. And every team goes through adversity at different points along the way. And unfortunately, the Whale at Yale had been a place where we had just had a history of just having tough outings. And I mean, I look back at that game and I kind of feel a little bit like, I played poorly I think we also ran into a bit of a hot goalie, but it was just one of those times where we had a tough night, hot goalie, tough night in New Haven. But those things happen, right? I mean, I don't think Coach Clear was particularly happy at the time, but he certainly helped us get over it quickly. His coach, as he's such a wonderful person that we all know and is brilliant, but people didn't really see the competitive side of him too. When things were not going well, whether in practice or in games, you know it. And he is just one of the most competitive people. So, we didn't play well, hot goalie, and we kind of get on the wrong side. But to his credit, right, as a leader, once the game's over, it's over and you move on, right? And it's on to the next. And what's the next challenge? What do we learn from this and where are we going as a team? And so I really think that, we followed his lead in so many different ways because he might have been yelling at you in the locker room for taking a stupid penalty, which he did with me many times, understandably and justifiably so. But when you're walking out after the game, he's kidding around and joking and we're off to the next, right? Let's turn the page, let's get over this, let's get better and let's move on. And so we really followed his lead.
So it does make me think of some lighthearted stories before we get, into maybe the Beanpot and into the tournaments and on the path towards the national championship. And so I'm going to share one with you, and I'd love to hear if each of you have a story, whether you want to make fun of me or somebody else on the team. But I think about the ECAC quarterfinals against RPI, and we swept that series. And I played the first game against RPI, we won. 7-3. And I don't know if I told you guys this story, but they granted Bruce Cole's penalty shot against us. And I don't know if you guys remember that. And Pierre Belanger was the referee. And so we get ready to have the penalty shot. And I was traumatized as a teenager because Neil Karns, who was a first-round draft pick of the Hell Olympics, Ted, you might have played with him on a World Junior team, and he died in a motorcycle accident, God rest his soul. I had a penalty shot against him, and I stopped it. But the Canadian biased officials said that I came out of the crease before he reached the blue line. So he got a shot, and he came in and he scored on me. So I turned to Pierre. I'm like, Pierre, hey, can I come out when he touches the puck, or do I have to wait till he gets to the blue lines? And he goes, I can't tell you. And then he walks away. So I'm sitting in the crease getting ready for this penalty shot. Now we're up 7-2. So I wait till he gets to the blue line. So I'm late coming out to challenge him. He comes down and he snipes and he scores on me. And then Pierre comes over and picks up the puck. He goes, you can come out when he touches the puck. I'm like, you son of a gun. Come on, Pierre. Why didn't you tell me beforehand, right? And, of course, coaches give me a hard time. Why didn't you come out of the net? And I don't want to tell him why, because then I would have looked like I didn't know the rules. So I think that was one of the other parts. Like, maybe we were talented enough to overcome our shortcomings, in this case mine. But I'm curious if you guys have any other funny stories that you might want to share with the audience here.
There's a laundry list, and I'll kind of maybe weave in two quick ones, which was we did have fun, right? We had a great group of guys. Everyone got along really well. And we're all competitive, but really a low ego group, right? It was really a group that just wanted to win together and see everyone do well. But, one of the characters on our team was Kevin Melrose, who was such a great addition to our team, had come in played at North Dakota, right?
North Dakota.
And then transferred in. But he added a physical element and just a really good player, good guy, very underrated. But Kevin was a practical joker. And so I remember up at St. Lawrence, we tried to go back and forth a little bit, but after we played Clarkson in the first of a back-to-back, and it was a big weekend because St. Lawrence was, I think, ranked first in the country, we all went to the Pizza Hut just across the street. And a few of us, while Kevin went over to the Pizza Hut, took every piece of furniture from his room, we put it outside the back door in the snow, and set it up like a bedside table, lamp, the whole thing in the snow, which is where you had to enter back into the hotel. And so Melly, Kevin Melrose being who he is, loved to dish out practical jokes, didn't like to be on the receiving end, then ripped around the hotel for 45 minutes trying to figure out who did it and who was he going to beat up because they did it. So that was one Kevin Melrose. My other quick Kevin Melrose story was, I think it was late in the year, and all of a sudden someone realized the mic is on in the penalty box, and Kevin Melrose goes over and grabs the mic in the penalty box and starts singing the Canadian national anthem at full throttle, right? All over the PA system. And so it was just kind of one of those, I think we were maybe heading out to the NCAAs that week and guys are just messing around, but sort of that fine balance of having fun while really pushing hard and preparing well. So those are a couple of stories that come to mind.
Can anybody, oh, go ahead, Edzo.
No, I just had another Melly story that might surprise a lot of people, but I remember when we used to go on long road trips, say Cornell or something, or Clarkson, St. Lawrence, 6-7 hour bus rides. Usually at the back of the bus, there was the Al Borbo poker game or whatever game you guys were playing, carts or whatever. And then I was at the front of the bus playing Trivial Pursuit with Dean Jewett. And then in the middle of the bus was Melly, who had just come from out-of-town news agency. Remember that place back when it existed? He would buy the newest computer science magazines, like computer magazines, and he would read them for hours and hours on the bus. And I thought, really? Like, I was expecting, I don't know, Green Eggs and Ham or Mad Magazine or something. I wasn't expecting modern computer science or whatever. That always added a little bit of an interesting element to the aura of Kevin Melrose.
We also had a lot of fun with each other, and I think one gaffe that one of our players had, Ted and Lane, I don't know if you want to take it, was the T-shirt that I believe Mr. Carone had constructed. Does anybody want to tell that story? And I think that's worth a couple laughs.
So it was kind of a big T-shirt day, era. But Nick Carone had this great idea that he was going to create a T-shirt and have 3 boxes. I believe one would have been the Beanpot, one would have been the ECAC championship, and the other one was going to be the national championship. And all 3 boxes, would have to be checked, and they were just going to be, selling like hotcakes on campus. And unfortunately, we lost the ECAC in the middle of the great investment of T-shirt money. So it didn't work out, which was probably a small consolation for the rest of us as far as losing. But it was pretty funny. Well thought out by Nick. It just didn't pan out.
Do you have any other fond stories? That can be funny or real about any of the other players, that we played with that year?
So I may throw in one about Paul Howley, right? In terms of, we had so many great guys on that team, Paul being one of them, and he and Eddie Perez being such good friends, and kind of anchoring that line with Harch. But when we were over in Sweden and Finland that year, kind of doing the tour, and we had a great time. It was a great experience. We went over to Finland, Sweden, played against professional teams over there, and we did okay in a couple of games, and we got thumped in a couple of games, which was, once again, great, kind of put us back in our place, know how hard we had to work. But we were sitting at dinner one night, and we had, if I'm not mistaken, reindeer the night before, and we're now having rabbit for kind of this next meal. And Paul Howley stands up and says, in the dinner, and we've got Coach Cleary and Mrs. Cleary, Ron Thompsoni and his wife, Jack Reardon was there, if I'm not mistaken, Fran Tolan, so a lot of people, stands up and says, first Rudolph, and now the Easter Bunny, is nothing sacred in this country. So, and that was kind of, I think, there was just so many fun, light moments along the way. There was the boat ride from Stockholm to Finland, or from Finland to Stockholm. I can't remember which way we went. And it was just kind of like a fun getaway. So many good guys, so many great characters. Brian Popio is a funny guy. The team Cappy, Josh Kaplan, one of the funniest guys. So we just had so many good guys and so many good stories. But Paul Howley, that line, I will never forget that line at that dinner when we were over in Europe.
That was great. Enzo, what was your take on the trip to Europe? That was my first trip, outside of the US and Canada as a kid whose parents didn't go to college. It was pretty amazing. Like, what was your take on the trip to Sweden and Finland?
I thought it was fantastic. From a hockey perspective, we got to play in the big European ranks against some really top-notch Finnish and Swedish teams. A couple of them were close games, a couple of them not so much. I remember losing one game, 6-1, 7-1, maybe even worse. We got our asses kicked a couple times, but that was all part of it. But more importantly, it was the off the ice stuff, right? The fun, the shenanigans, the boat ride from Finland to Sweden, the skits. Remember, we did skits. We sort of celebrated Christmas together over there, and we did some.
Yeah, but we promised not to talk about those in this show this evening.
No, we won't. I won't go into detail, but I will say this. Back to like Cappy and Duke Howley. You think about those guys in the corner of the locker room all year long. I would put that comedy duo up against anyone from Saturday Night Live any day of the week. Pure humor, nonstop.
ECAC tournament. I'd love to get your take, guys, in terms of, that Vermont game and getting upset in the Boston Garden. And, do you guys think we took that one too lightly, or just one of those days where the puck didn't bounce for us?
I don't think we took them lightly. They were a good team, right? They had a lot of talent. They had a lot of speed. We had a couple good games against them during the regular season. I just think that we had a bad day. We were playing at the Garden, where we'd never really had much success, right? That smaller ice surface. UVM traveled well. They had a huge crowd there. But one thing I remember about that particular segment of the season was that things were starting to happen a little too easily for us. We were winning games where we weren't on our A game, so to speak, and maybe things were coming a little bit too easily for us. That as painful as it was at the time, that provided us with a little bit of a checkup. Like, hey, you know what? you're not as good as you think you are. You do need to show up and play well if you're gonna win. And so that was a little bit of a reality check for us, I think, in hindsight. It was also a game that we lost Scott McCormick, broken arm, that hurt.
Yeah, and he was a key right-handed shot defense for us who, just did his job, right? Played solid defense, was a breakout machine. It's interesting you say that. And Lane or Teddy, I'd love, to hear your take. Like, I think our defense were tough and incredibly good defensively, but they never got the accolades that, you forwards did. And I'm teasing on that side of things, but we were known as a fast skating, high powered offensive team. And yet, we had a very strong defensive core. I'd love for somebody to just talk a little bit about those 8 guys who played during the year and what they meant to us as a team.
So to Chuck, listen, I think it's so well said. And I think it's back to a little bit of the selfless nature of our team, because it was not a group that wanted the accolades, nor were they looking to kind of do too much offensively. They really kind of knew their role in how to kind of make our team better. But one of the great things about that team was they moved the puck so incredibly well, right? Scott McCormick, Brian McCormick, Nick Carone, Kevin Sneddy,
Kathy.
right? You kind of go down the whole, and Kevin Melrose, like you go down the whole group, but they move the puck so well, and it's so underappreciated from a team standpoint about you can't do anything as a forward if you can't get the puck, and you don't get the puck in the right place and get going. But those guys were so good at moving the puck and making the right play and making the right decision, which is brilliant in so many ways, but so underappreciated, and obviously so good defensively in their own zone. So it started, obviously, Chuck, with you and Al in the back, right? Kind of playing a little bit of traffic cop, helping them, talking to them, telling them what's happening. But man, I really feel like those guys did so much that were little things underappreciated, but really made us able to have games where we were scoring 9 or 10 goals, right? Because we were getting the puck in the right place at the right time and able to do things.
Yeah, and they are, the epitome of selflessness. Let's talk about the Beanpot. Teddy, you're a Boston kid like me. You'd played in a Beanpot the previous year, but Harvard hadn't won, at least in 10, 12 years, I think, the Beanpot. What did that season's Beanpot mean to you? And what did you think about playing in the Beanpot during your time at Harvard?
Well, for me, I always, people ask me about, being able to play, in the Boston Garden for the Bruins. But to me, the first time I felt like I had really made it was when I stood on the blue line for the Beanpot. As a kid, I had a million, street hockey games, and we used to actually play with socks back then. That was kind of a cool thing to have socks be the ball in the living room. But we were always the Beanpot schools. We would introduce ourselves, and we had 4 boys in the family, and those are some physical games, I can tell you. Mom and Dad went out to dinner, and there was no timeouts and no penalties. So, but the Beanpot was really important. I think it was, it really was for bragging rights in the city of Boston. And, I think for us, it was also kind of, a chance for us to kind of, put ourselves to a test a little bit. Back then, you look at, BC was, a Final Four kind of caliber team. BU was good. Northeastern was good. And those games too, the emotions, would run so high because of the crowd that, on any given night, anything could happen. So I think it was the Beanpot. To me, I would have been devastated if we weren't able to win a Beanpot in the 4 years, at Harvard. And I just felt coming in with guys like Lane and Eddie and Albie back, and having guys like Kevin Melrose and Scott Farden, and having someone like yourself and Al that, to me, I knew would hold up to the pressure. I felt really good going in, and it didn't mean that it was easy, but I did feel like we had a great opportunity going into the Beanpot that year.
And what I think people who are younger don't realize And we were all really lucky to play in a sold out Boston Garden in the old Garden. I mean, it's still great to watch a Beanpot now or to go to a Bruins game. It can get loud, but that old rink where it's on top of you and you can feel the glass shake and you can hear that noise of whatever it was, 15,000, where now it's 19,000. It was incredible and pretty deafening. So it was an amazing experience for me to be able to play in that in high school, but then to play in it at Harvard and have success was really phenomenal. I mean, Eddie, I'm sure you feel the same way as a Boston kid. What was your favorite Beanpot memory?
Well, certainly winning it in '89 was my favorite Beanpot memory because the prior years we didn't have much luck. And I can tell you, one of the things that drove me crazy about that was, 86, 87, 88. We were the team of the 4 Boston schools that went to the Final Four every year. We were the ones playing in the national championship game. BU, BC, and Northeastern did not make it to the Frozen Four in any of those years. So we were clearly the program that was having the most success at the national level, but we couldn't win the Beanpot, and it drove me crazy because a lot of the kids that I grew up with playing with in youth hockey, and I played against them in high school hockey, they played for BC and BU, and it drove me crazy that we couldn't beat them. Of course, back then, with the Harvard calendar being what it was, we were always at a little bit of a disadvantage coming from but at the end of the day, it just drove me crazy that we didn't do better. And that year we won it. It was great. It was like kind of a relief. I mean, yeah, it was fun to win it, and there was nice, but it was a little bit of a monkey off the back feeling afterwards. And then, another fun memory from Beanpot '89, when we got back to the campus that night. I remember one of my roommates was the producer of the Pudding Show, and that was the night that they had the debut, and they had Kathleen Turner was the Woman of the Year, and she was out hanging out with all the students, and I thought it was pretty cool to hang out with Kathleen Turner after winning the Beanpot.
Let's turn our attentions to sort of the march towards the NCAA tournament, and just one story that I think is really interesting. And I know you guys gave me a hard time about this afterwards, and it was our last regular season. The reason I'm bringing that up is, one of the guys we've mentioned, and with all the high profile, the years you played in the NHL, Teddy, Lane winning the Hobie, Albie being an Olympian, Peter Savaglia was the ECAC scoring champion that year. And does anybody remember how he got to be dubbed the ECAC scoring champion on the last night of the season?
No.
So Marty McDonough was the ref, Teddy, and I was playing against Clarkson. And there was a first period goal in which the puck was dumped in, and I made a breakout pass up the wing, and gave it to CJ, who gave it to whomever who scored a goal. And the ref had given Albie an assist. And as I was going off the ice, because Marty was a friend of mine, I'm like, hey, Marty, I passed the puck to CJ. And so he changed the assist from Al Bourbeau to me. I didn't know. And at the end of the night, it was informed that Pete Savaglia had won the ECAC scoring title by 1 point over Alan Bourbeau because I had changed the stat. Because how many times does a goalie get to an assist? So that was another memorable moment. And I have one more that I'll share when we get to the Final Four with everybody, which I know you all know. But it's time to talk about the NCAA and the loss to Vermont, and thankfully we won the consolation game against Cornell. Like, that put our seeding in doubt, which I didn't really think much about the time. But again, looking at how the NCAA hockey was at that time, and I was naive and I was clueless. So Lane, maybe you or Eddie had a better vision of this, but our seeding was not secure, right? Like, whether we had a bye or whether we'd have to travel on the road. Can you talk us through the machinations of how we were sort of looking at that before we ended up settling in on a home NCAA tournament bid against Lake Superior State?
So I'd say, Chuck, I mean, I don't remember it all, with complete accuracy, but that loss put us in some jeopardy, right? I mean, we dropped the ball at the wrong time. It was, as I think said earlier, it was a great wake-up call of just, okay, let's refocus here, and we still have a big prize down the road that we need to win. So I think when we kind of got through all that, it really was a level set. And now what does it look like? And what's the draw look like? Who's coming to our building? At that point, you do kind of, we hopefully as a top seed host. And then the question was, who are we hosting? And obviously, as Chuck's saying, the lower the seed you are, the better the team that's going to be rolling in. And in some ways, I actually thought we got a tough draw because we faced Lake Superior in that quarterfinal series. And there was, frankly, more risk there from a physical standpoint, almost than from a loss standpoint, because we just had a better team. They had a good run. They had some good players, but they were a little bit off that year. But they played such a physical style, and their game was to run teams through the boards. And that was the one where you just sort of thought, gosh, we got to get through this and stay healthy.
Yeah, and that was a team. Remember, Lake State had won the national title the year before. So they came in ready, and we took care of them pretty handily, 4-2 and 5-2. So I know that I don't remember the quotes, but Anzalone was pretty complimentary of our team that weekend and how we took care of business at home. And that was the precursor to, the Final Four. And everybody wants to talk about the Minnesota game. But, I want to talk about this Michigan State game and the team we played, first with a little bit of humor, because people who don't follow the team, although it's shown itself in the papers a few different times. And I want to just clear the record here tonight that February 17th, up in Burlington, Vermont, I happened to come down with the flu or food poisoning or whatever the case might be. And people talk about that as a fateful day that put me in the national championship game, because for you guys, like, I was sick that day, which is kind of scary because I was sick rooming with the other goalie. And so Alain and I, who are, best of friends, were sharing the room, and I was throwing up that day. And I just went to coach after pregame and said, I said, if you want me to go, coach, I'll play, but I would really prefer to get rest tonight and be ready to go. And remember, we still had a third goalie in Mike Francis. Alain Waugh was a pretty awesome goalie. Not playing, I put myself at risk to not play. So I didn't want to get benched for the rest of the year either. But, I said I'll be ready to go. So coach took it into consideration. Played Al that night. We beat Vermont at Vermont. I played the next night. We beat RPI at Houston Fieldhouse. And that put us on a rotational schedule the rest of the way, in which, without having a third game against Lake State, and if we got to the national title, that I ended up being fortunate to play. But I want to clear the air to everyone watching tonight that was not intentional by any stretch of the imagination. But then knowing how things progressed, that put Al in the Michigan State semifinal game. And to be honest, guys, like, his play in that first period is one of the most electric and incredible periods that I've seen a goaltender play. And, I want, to have one of you guys just talk about, you guys were on the ice that night. I was on the bench. Like, how did he inspire you guys? Like, what was your take on the way he played and helped us get through that first period?
Chuck, can I take that question?
Go for it.
I tell people that all the time. It's one of the best goaltending performances I've ever seen. Al Roy in the semifinal game against Michigan State. I mean, what you did in the finals obviously was amazing, but some of the saves that Al made against Michigan State were like out of this world. It reminded me a lot of Chris Terreri from Providence back in '85. I don't know if you remember when he led that unheralded Providence team all the way to the finals that lost to RPI.
That might be the one goalie, Eddie, goaltending college performance that I might put ahead of Al's game. Like, Terreri was pretty amazing. Right.
Because Terreri didn't have quite as strong of a team behind him. He really carried that team all the way. Right. Al had a pretty good team in front of him that night. But anyway, yeah, he was incredible, including he stopped Kip Miller on a flat out breakaway in the first period. That save against Bobby Reynolds that defied all logic. When we went out in that first period against Michigan State, I remember distinctly we were maybe a little bit sluggish, or I don't know, maybe we were nervous being on the big stage or whatever. It took us a little while to get going. Once we did get going, watch out. We rolled them pretty good that game. But the first period, it was still very close. And thanks to Al, he kept us in it.
You mentioned Bobby Reynolds, Eddie, and I didn't know this until just doing a little research before, tonight. The truth is, I think none of us really relive the glory days and watch these games all that often. Last year we did a get together, and that was an amazing experience. And maybe we'll do another, get together, because I love spending time with you. But in preparation, I was told that Bobby Reynolds was quoted as saying, "Thank God we're not playing Minnesota going into the semifinals." Did any of you guys have that bulletin board material, or did any of you feel disrespected by the teams out west about who we were coming into the Final Four?
I mean, Chuck, I did not know that until subsequently, right, that Bobby Reynolds said that. I mean, I felt like that year we got lots of respect, right? I mean, I think we were ranked, 2 or 3 preseason, 1 during the course of the year, dropped off when we lost to Vermont. So I felt like in many ways people expected us to be there in the finals. And I almost thought that semifinal game, we kind of expected to be in the final game too, and weren't quite as ready as we should have been for that semifinal game. But I think once we woke up, and thanks to Al for giving us a little bit of time, because we all know that in those games and in those moments, things can go dramatically different. If they score a couple of goals in that first period and start feeling it, we're now chasing it. And games can really change, from a momentum standpoint. And so I think we were really fortunate, but it's funny in hindsight to hear that. They had a great team. Michigan State was loaded. Bobby Reynolds, I think Rod Brindamore was on that team.
Yeah.
And so they were really good. Minnesota, by the way, had 2 Olympians back too, and were flat out loaded as well. So the right teams were in the finals that year. But Al, as Edza said, I mean, he was the man in that first period. We all settled in and we're like, okay, we got to play here. And then I think a bunch of guys really stepped up in that game, including Savags, right, who had a great game there, and Alroy more than anybody else.
Yeah, I think, when people think about that 89 season and the talent that was playing college hockey at that time, I mean, some of these names are going to be pretty, familiar. The goaltender, J.C. Muzzatti, played in the NHL. Rod Brindamore, Danton Cole, who's now the Michigan State head coach. Sean Heafy. I'm just looking like Dwayne Norris. Who? What's that?
Kip Miller was on that team.
Kip Miller, Bobby Reynolds, Dwayne Norris. They had a ton of NHL talent on that roster, right? So we did not take a shortcut through, the NCAA tournament, whether it's beating, Bruce Hoffert, who was, I think he was a Hobie Baker Award winner, and then coming in and dispatching these guys. So we earned our keep. And Ted, you had you were the MVP of the Final Four. Your semifinal game was just as strong as your national championship game. Talk to me a little bit about, your experience in the semis, because I'd be curious to get your take on, the game and beating a guy like Muzzatti. You had a beautiful goal through his legs, and I remember that one. That backhand deep.
You know what? It was one of those games where, I think, there are certain plays, I think, to me, that sometimes happen in the game that kind of give you this feeling like this might be our night, and I think that the save that Al made on Bobby Reynolds at the end of the period, kind of, and I'm not sure what the score was, but I think it might have been maybe 2-0 at the time. But I felt like, after that save, I felt like, we might have these guys mentally a little bit. And, so, for me, I actually, played with Kip Miller in the 16-year-old team and I think the 17-year-old team as well. I think he was one of the leading scorers in the country that year too. So, I think, Rod Brindamore was a freshman, but he was, probably the top freshman in the country that year. So there was a talented team. Jason Muzzatti played for the Hartford Whalers, played for, I think, Calgary as well. So that was a talented team. And, I just felt, if we played them 5 times, I still think we would have won the series. But I think the games would have been a lot closer. I think it was just one of those nights, which happens, in big games where, you get a couple goals, maybe you get a break, and your goalie makes a couple incredible saves, and maybe the game gets away from him. Because later in the game, we kind of won kind of handily, but I don't think that necessarily was indicative of the differential in the two teams. I think they were one of the top teams coming in, and I think we happened to just have the puck go in the net, and the one thing that we could do was score. So if we had a lot of guys on any given night that could score, and that night the puck just went in for us.
Yeah, I mean 6-3 to beat a team like that, that handily is pretty impressive. So on to the national championship game. But before that, we were really lucky in that Coach Tomasoni, having Virginia, Minnesota, or Evelyn, Minnesota roots, was a strong recruiter out in Minnesota. And so back then, right, you had a day in between the semifinals and the national championship. One of the things was in between, Lane, you were awarded the Hobie Baker, but Todd Hartshey's parents, hosted us for, a meal that in between days. And that was a really great, I think, experience and bringing us together and giving us a little bit of home cooking. But maybe one of you guys could just take that and talk a little bit about how that created a family environment and gave us a chance to just kind of relax for a day.
Hey, Chuck, listen, I think it was so many moments along the year kind of, were important to us. And that was just a nice, almost respite from the grind of being in the hotel, the usual kind of meals, and just getting away. And guys were just hanging out, right? And just having fun. I remember guys throwing the football around outside, having a nice meal. The Hartseys are wonderful folks. And it was just just a very simple day of let's get away from this for a little bit. We got a day off. Let's enjoy it, get away, recharge, hang on his team. And there's one game left. And so it was kind of the perfect getaway, for us as we prepared for that final game. And that night, we were going to be able to watch the other semifinal game because that was on, the off night. So we played on, I think, I kind of remember Thursday, then other semis Friday, and then the final Saturday. But it was the perfect way to kind of spend that day. And we had a lot of fun, right? It was just lots of laughs and just a good time to be together away from the rink and away from the hotel.
Right. And it was great for these guys too, because their family, right, was, located in, Minnesota. Scotty Farden from Virginia, and, Todd Hartshey from Anoka, and Mike Vukanich, from Duluth. And so we just had, some great guys from that state too. And going into the final, of course, they were going to get to play in front of their home crowd, like Teddy and Eddie and I got to do in the Boston Garden. Here we go, entering, playing the Minnesota Golden Gophers, a storied franchise in the St. Paul Civic Center with 15,500 fans, and 15,000 of them are cheering for, Minnesota. Eddie, you had been in the finals before. Did that feel any different to you? Did it feel, more, stressful in such a hostile environment? Tell me what was going through your mind heading into that game.
I don't know about stressful, but more exciting. I mean, I think the venue was really electric, right? I mean, don't forget, not only were they such a great team and such a, they're like a pro team in Minnesota. They're all Minnesota kids, right? Every one of them was from the state of Minnesota. So, they had a little parade downtown. The Minnesota band marched through the streets of downtown St. Paul into the center. I mean, it was a pretty fun environment, right? And, of course, I remember the glass boards. It's the only rink in America that had glass boards, right? Which was kind of cool. But we knew it was going to be a great game, right? I mean, the stage was set. The two teams that probably were supposed to be there were there. And what happened over the next 60 minutes, who knows? But it was probably as close to the game as people were hoping for. It was every bit as fast and physical and competitive as people hoped it would be. It was sort of everything that we were looking forward to all year long. And again, we knew that we weren't going to lose. This was our year. We just felt like, for whatever reason, this is our time, to steal a quote from Herb Brooks, right? That was our season. We were going to win.
Let's walk through a few of the plays. And I guess the first one, is to start down. 1-0 against Minnesota. And what I will freely admit was a crappy goal through my legs, and I should have had it. And, that's okay, because we'll get to the one that I was going to get. But I'm curious, guys, on the bench, Edzo, we go down about 6 minutes into the game. Minnesota's going crazy. I'm an ice, so I have no clue. Like, what's it like on the bench? What's coach saying? What's the feeling on the team?
Well, first of all, it was incredibly loud. The rink went crazy, and they have this Minnesota cheer where they go around the rink and they spell out Minnesota and all that sort of stuff. But we didn't panic. I mean, it's a long game. So we just stayed focused, stay on point. Let's not get distracted. There's a lot of hockey left. So we didn't get down on ourselves. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, when we got out of the period, down 1-0, and we get, to regroup and come out, and I think we came back energized. And Teddy, I still remember that first goal. I mean, I remember both goals, but that first goal is it's such a, I think prototypical, type of goal that our team scored on the power play. Donato from McDonald and Bourbeau, and you just absolutely shot a pill glove high on Stauber. Can you just walk us through like what you saw as that play developed?
Well, I think if I remember correctly, Lane carried it into the zone, and kind of took a lot of, pressure, and a lot of attention. It, went back to Albie, and he slid it over to me, and I had a little bit of room to step in, I was just thinking, Stauber was, he was the guy, so you weren't gonna try to, finesse one by him, So I tried to step into it and shoot it as hard as I could, and I always love to shoot, glove high, Chucky, when I had a chance back then. So, but you know what, when Eddie was saying, when you guys are talking about when the score was 1-0, the one thing I thought about that game where I felt like we always were going to have a chance because, it was our style. And I think Minnesota kind of played the same style. They played hockey. They get up and down. They made plays, and so for us, to me, I thought, hey, we win these kind of games. When you want to go up and down and play hockey and play fast. And I think that's why the game was so exciting. But I would love to say that I thought all that much, but I picked my head up, saw it, and shot it, and luckily it went in.
Hey, Chuck,
that's hockey.
If I may, just one thing about that. So Al makes a pass over to Teddy. Teddy's walking in. I'm then looping around kind of back towards behind the net. And so I couldn't have had a better angle and the whole thing because Teddy's stepping and ripping it. And I was so thrilled that it went in the net, which was number one. I was also thrilled he didn't shoot high because it may have taken my head off, right? Teddy was shooting the puck so hard. But it was kind of one of those where I had such a great angle and Teddy just ripped it, right? In that moment, it's kind of like those key moments in games where you just need good things to happen, right? We had started to come back, right? But we needed something good to happen. And as Teddy did so often, right? He stepped up in that big moment and delivered, right? And that we needed that goal to get going. But it was a great shot in a great situation.
Right. It was, and I like your point, Teddy, and that's really hockey. Like, you don't think, you just see it and you react, and you made a hockey play, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful goal. Later that period, in the second period, 4 minutes later, Lane, you score what is just a picturesque thing of beauty. And I wonder, like, as a goalie, like, I want to hear from you, like, you get that puck, and you're able to pick up speed. Can you just walk us through that play as you're bearing down all alone on Stauber? Like, could you take us through that?
Gosh, sort of playing neutral zone, and sort of the puck just kind of came to me, and I was looping. So as everyone knows plays hockey, when you're crossing over, you're sort of picking up speed. So I was starting to pick up speed, and then all of a sudden the puck was there. And then I felt like I had a bit of an angle on the D as he's sort of trying to, sort of regroup back. So then all of a sudden, you got the D, but then you got Rob Stauber, who's a great goalie there. And at that point, as a forward, right, particularly, it's sort of like things go a little bit blank, which is I want to get to the far side and get this to the net before he can react to it, right? And if you look at that, which I hadn't for a long time, but we watched last year, Rob reacted pretty darn quickly. And so there was some room wide, but he got his glove stick down pretty quickly. So at that point, it was really one of make the move, right? beat them wide and shoot as quickly as you can and get it in the net. But it was certainly one of like right place, right time. And then also just kind of that sense of, gosh, you're just so happy that we're kind of scored another goal, right? And we're in a good position in the game. And so, it is those moments, I think, as Teddy and Edzo and you have all said, like it's sharing it with your teammates, right? It's not what you did, but like now all of a sudden you get to celebrate with your buddies and you're one step closer to get into the promised land, right? Let's just keep going here. We got one more. Let's get another one. So it was just, good situation, right time, and against a really good goalie. So I clearly felt lucky to beat Rob in that case, but he didn't have a lot of help there, right? He had nothing in terms of support on that goal.
Right. And then, it only lasted, that lead was short-lived. We go up 2-1. And, 3 minutes later, Minnesota goes on a power play. And so, in the 7 goals that were scored, they're 3 power play goals. We get 1, they get 2. And when you say, like you were saying, Lane, such, vaunted offensive players that, Jason Miller from Chorsky and Pitlick, like, boom, all of a sudden it's tied up and we go into the third period. And I think this really tested the mettle of our team. And, in the third period, with about 8 minutes left to go, Ted, you score a beautiful backhander over a sprawled out, Stauber. And I know that we've joked because Vuk had at least 1 or 2 chances right before that to probably get the goal. And, it turns out that, you're able to bury it and finish it. But that was a mad scramble. Take us through that goal too, Ted, because that's a pretty exciting play.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Vuk actually played great in the game. He had a ton of chances. And, if you remember, that's, Rob Stauber was a high school teammate of Vuk, right? So, there was definitely some added pressure on the Minnesota guys. They had, come out east and now they're playing against the University of Minnesota. And, I thought Vuk was immense all game and he was great. And I don't remember the whole goal, the sequence that led to it, but I know that, John Murphy, had made several good plays on the night. So did Mike Vucinic. And I just remember the puck kind of being available on a rebound. It kind of came to my backhand and, just knowing Stauber, like you kind of had to finish the play. You weren't going to just chip it into an empty net. So I tried to go up with it and, was able to get it in up top. So that was exciting. But I have to say for as much as, I might have been overconfident against Boston College earlier in the season. When guys came to me, I said, right after we scored, I said, this is not over. Let's finish it. This is, we got a long way to go.
And that one's on record too, because if you can turn up the volume, if you're watching a replay of the game, you can distinctly hear you saying this isn't over as the team is, the 5 guys on the line are celebrating with you. And, sure enough, late in the game with under 4 minutes to go, Minnesota goes up on a power play. And I remember this one because I really feel like, while I said I wasn't going to let the overtime post off of Randy Scarda go in, that one I remember, because I remember, Tommy Peterson, giving it to Peter Hankinson on a one-timer. And that ice was soft, right? It was the spring. It was not conducive to 2 fast teams. And it was still an exciting and fast game, but the ice was sloppy and chippy. And Hankinson kind of like hit it on the top of his stick and it fluttered. And that sort of threw me off. And you kind of you see me falling forward as if I were shot, because I was trying to make the glove save and it was, up there. And, I was really mad at myself for that one, because I thought I could have stopped that one and maybe kept the game from going into overtime. But it is what it is. The place is going crazy. We're all in there, tense.
So hey, Chuck, listen, if I might chime in, and I think it was a testament to our whole team, in terms of how everybody viewed it. Just as you did, right? You took responsibility for that more so than you should have. It's a power play one-timer, right? There's nothing you could do. You made so many great saves throughout that whole game. But I think that was kind of a testament to our whole team about the philosophy of everyone was willing to accept more blame than they should have for situations and wanted less credit. And I always think that's a sign of a great leader. And I think we were just a team built of those type of individuals who were willing to accept, right, kind of more blame. If a mistake was made, it wasn't someone else, it was me. What could I have done? Just as you said there. But you made so many great saves throughout that game, right? Both throughout the game, but then in overtime. And that was one where one-timer power play, there just wasn't much to do, right? But we just need to get back to work after that one went in.
You know who was ready to take the blame for that was John Weisbrod. Chuck, here you are saying I should have had that one. Weisbrod, I remember him telling me this. Had the game ended differently, he said, I would have been the GOAT. I'm the one that got the penalty. I'm the one that gave them the power play, and they tied it up. Of course, that never happened, but for the record, he did say that.
Right. And I think just the character of our team. And, speaking of the character of our team, we're sitting in, and I know, Teddy, you're going to dispute this, but I will take this with me to my grave. He's smiling. So he acknowledges that everybody's quiet and we're nervous and Coach Cleary's not saying anything to us and we're getting ready to go back out. And I just remember Teddy standing up you were a vocal leader. And that's why I love playing with you and having you as a teammate in high school and college. And you start trying to get everybody going and you look around and you say, you guys, you should all be salivating to get back out there. And all of a sudden, and you guys remember Coach Cleary's laugh. It's one of the most recognizable cackles. And he just looks at you and everybody else and starts laughing. And he just doesn't have anything to say. He's like, let's go, boys. And we went out there with a lot of fire and energy. And, it takes us to only 4 minutes into overtime, Edzo. And, you are the man of the hour. You're the guy who I think shaped our histories and our life trajectories more than you might ever imagine. Just walk us through the play. You get the honor of the last conversation piece of the night, the national championship goal.
Wow, I'm not even sure I'm worthy of that honor, but I'll give it a try. I mean, it was a relatively harmless play. I mean, there was a face-off to the left, to the right of Rob Stauber, and I sort of got position on my player and I was able to get into the face-off circle before him and pick up the loose puck because Pete didn't win the face-off cleanly. It was sort of a draw. And so I was fortunate enough to get in there, get a stick on it, and I passed it back to Brian McCormick on the point. And once I did that, I started heading towards the net thinking, there may be a rebound here. Let's see. And sure enough, there was. And again, I had escaped my player. I had gotten a little bit of open space. And so I picked the puck up. I was skating from left to right across the crease. And that's when I let go of the rocket of all backhands, the backhand and all backhands. I say that jokingly, of course. Listen, it went in. I think it went in because Stauber was expecting the fastball and I gave him the changeup. Maybe that was why.
And so the length of time it's telling you're taking to tell this story, the puck still hasn't crossed the goal line yet. And they're showing it simultaneously with this video.
Yeah, I know. And I remember watching it cross the line. I mean, I distinctly remember that. And when that happened, it was like, after that, it was like instant euphoria. Time stood still for a second and everyone was jumping on and it was pretty crazy. But when you look back at it now, it's not a terribly impressive play. I mean, after Lane beating Stauber and after Teddy nailing that bullet, I feel sort of inept after those goals. But I'll take it.
Nobody asks how they go in, Eddie. It's just that they go in, right? Yeah. And that obviously was a magical moment. One of the most amazing things in looking at the video after the fact, whether it was a couple days or 30 years, I still remember bald-headed Coach Cleary running around center ice looking for somebody to hug while we were all in the corner and celebrating with nobody to cheer for. But, that's poking, of course, some fun at one of the greatest influences in all of our lives. But as we wrap up, because I know Nick can move some things throughout, I would love, Lane, just talk a little bit about Coach Cleary's influence on the team that year.
Gosh, I mean, there's so many ways that Coach Cleary influenced us. I mean, certainly as hockey players, but I think as Teddy said earlier, and I think we all believe, much more importantly as people, in terms of how to live your life, how to treat other people, what's important in life. And so the hockey piece was one very small part of the equation for all of us. I shouldn't say small, it was a very important part of the equation for all of us. But what Coach Cleary taught us about life and about being a good person, how to live your life, is something that will endure forever. And so, I take away so much of that. And, with Coach Cleary from an athletic standpoint only, just kind of skewing to that side for a moment, his competitive instincts, right? The desire to excel and to kind of be the best. And we're going to do it our way. And this is the right way. And we all just so bought in. And when we won, I think Teddy said it earlier, it was really, and Coach Cleary is so selfless, right? And we learned so much from him about that. But it wasn't just about us. It was about all of the Harvard community, right? It was about the students, the faculty, the alums, about showing that you could achieve this at the highest level in the most prestigious academic institution in the world, but still be the best hockey team in the country. And so I really felt like, for all of us, it was so important to share that experience together and to be able to set those goals and to win together, to do it the right way and to achieve that ultimate goal. And sharing was wonderful, but it meant so much to do it at Harvard, right? Harvard, from a historical standpoint, something that had not been able to be done, and to have a small part in that, to deliver that for the university, for Coach Cleary, for the alums, like you sort of wrap it all up. And I do remember like that whole experience was surreal. Like it's so, I describe the euphoria. I remember being surreal of, oh my gosh, on the bench, did the puck go in? Like, did that really go in? Is it over, right? Did we win? And you're sort of like processing real time. And then it's just elation. And Coach Cleary was running around trying to hug someone. Fortunately, I had skates on, so I tackled somebody, I think, right? Just because I needed, and so, but like it's just one of those rare moments where you do end up winning the last game. And it doesn't happen a lot. You do it with 25, really, even the guys who weren't playing that night, injured, but you do it with 25 of your best friends who you've sacrificed so much with, gone through so much, the highs and the lows, and you get to share it with them and to share it with Coach Cleary and give him that ultimate victory that he so deserved for everything he did for all of us and for Harvard, and they give it to be a part of it for the Harvard community. It was an extraordinary ending to a wonderful season.
Well said, Lane. Does anybody have any memories? One of the things that I think is really special in the aftermath of the award, and maybe they did this for a time, but I know that it's not on, the president's agenda these days, that that we were able to go meet President Bush. I still have that picture here in my office, and that meant a lot. That I'll be able to at some point, when I pass, say that I got a chance to meet a president in the White House. That was a certainly special memory. Are there any other memories, guys, that you want to mention before we finish up?
The only thing I would say, Chuck, is you could sense, I think, going into overtime, like, hey, we're in overtime for the national championship, and we kind of had a little bit of a magical group, the kind of the stars had aligned. And I think that's probably, I'm guessing if you went down to the Minnesota locker room, it was also dead quiet because, they were trying to win a national championship in their home building, as well. But, I think, to me, like I said earlier, like it's really not just about that game. To me, it's about kind of the whole season, the trip to Europe, the beginning of the season, we're, talking fondly about, how little we did in the, in the preseason, but just the camaraderie and, the different personalities on the team. And, what I love about it is it's, you got Eddie who scored, the most famous goal in the history of Harvard hockey, and maybe the most famous goal in the history of the Ivy League, because even though I think, Yale won it, they didn't win it in overtime. But he's so low key about it. And I think that's kind of the way the team was. I don't think for all of us, it was about winning. And, whether it was, Peter Savaglia that was the leading scorer, or it was Lane that was the Hobey Baker winner, or, we had goaltenders that alternated every game all the way through the national championship game. That would be, unheard of, in today's day and age. But I think each and every person that was on that team, and I say this even about guys that didn't play as much or as prominent roles, every single guy felt a part of it, and every single guy is super proud of not only the accomplishment, but more importantly, the people we got to do it with. And that to me is what's special. And that's why, I get excited to talk about it. It's more about the group we were able to do it with. That's what excites me. And I think that's the part to me that keeps on giving, because, you get to see your teammates, and everybody's going on to do different things in life. But, there's so many great guys on that team. And, that was a highlight for all of us. But I think that the key was the people we got to do it with. I think also, to hear Coach Cleary say after, this is for all the people that have ever gone to Harvard and all the athletes that have gone to Harvard. And this is, proof that you can have it both. You can be a great student and be a successful athlete. So for us to kind of be part of all that, I think is pretty special.
Edzo, so, as a team as deep as we were, there were a lot of guys who contributed throughout the year as unsung heroes. Tell us about those, depth guys who really, helped keep us on our toes and pushed us to be our best.
Yeah, right. And listen, a lot of those guys got a lot of playing time earlier in their Harvard career, right? Sophomore year, junior year, whatever. And then this particular year, because of the abundance of talent, they, unfortunately for them, played a lesser role, but they were still incredibly important on the ice, because when there was an injury, when they did get playing time, they contributed. But also in the locker room, right? They were a big part of the team. Guys like Craig Taucher, the guy like two freshmen, Big Cody and Tim Burke. They stepped into a lineup. They could have been impact player on any other team in the country that year, but they just so happened to walk into a program where there wasn't room that particular year. So they played, sort of a fifth line role, but they played it importantly. In fact, I was talking to Berkey not too long ago, and he reminded me that his very first college game, Weisbrot got hurt, so he slid in to play Wise's spot. He scored a goal in his first period of play, courtesy of the beautiful Pete Sedaglia setup, by the way. but on defense, like the depth on defense, right? Like Scott Farden or Pope or Greg Hess, again, Farden and Pope, who had a lot of playing time prior. There were just so many great players that they didn't get the playing time that I'm sure they would have loved to have had, but they were every bit as important, in the chemistry of the team, in the locker room, you name it, right?
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our roundtable discussions tonight. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about the 1980-89 season. It was certainly one that was memorable for myself, our panelist, Ted Donato, Robert D. Ziff, coach of the Harvard hockey team, Lane McDonald, and Ed Crayer. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you at the rinks.